So the clock on the wall says 6, and there's a lot of friendly chattering, and that's good, but it's time to get started. So what we get is the Administrative Department report from Aaron.
Well, good evening, Budget Committee, amazing colleagues, and members of the public. It's my pleasure today to provide you with the Administrative Department recommendations for fiscal year 25. Now, this evening's presentations, I've got a number of different divisions, and they are divisions that represent a focus on services that are provided internally to the organization. And I'll go through those. As I said, there's quite a few, but they're not a lot of detail associated with some of these, so we should be able to go through these relatively quickly. They're relatively simple because they are broken out and very specific. But the department organizations that we'll talk about are listed behind me. So I just want to state the importance, and I know we stated it in the budget message, but I wanted to state it again today, that the strategic plan truly is the North Star for the city. And everything that you've seen in the past couple of budget committee meetings is directly associated with the strategic plan, and that's no different with the budgets that you're going to see this evening. In actuality, a lot of the budgets that you see today go in to support the mechanisms needed in order to develop the strategic plan, maintain the strategic plan. So the first one can be found on page 116 of your budget. It's mayor and council. This budget directly supports the council in developing council goals and the city's work plan. It includes meeting costs, TV, television, broadcasting, advertising for committees, community surveys, and a small amount of funds also available for the committees, all of our advisory committees. And we have over 11 different advisory committees and commissions. So when we break down and take a look at what's in the budget, this is on page 118. We have a small increase in materials and services from fiscal year 24 and 25. That represents, the majority of that represents potential increases in food costs as we provide those services to the city council and the different advisory committees at times. Contractual services jumps from 167 to 270. That's an increase of $102,000. And that is for election costs. We've noticed that our election costs have gone up, but also a part of that is also we're budgeting for a lobbyist. We found that in grants past, we seem to get the short end of the stick when it comes to state and federal allocations. And we believe it is important that we have a voice at the state and federal level. And by spending a little money through having a lobbyist that will lobby for us and our concerns specific to grants pass will provide us with a good return on our investment. So that also includes that cost for the upcoming year. And then direct charges are just associated with other things that includes facilities and facilities replacement. And you've noticed that direct charges and other budget line items have increased, and it does increase also for mayor and council. So total difference is $117,000, with the majority of that in contractual and professional services, as I have explained. Questions?
Josh.
Yeah, going back to your lobbyist, how much exactly are you budgeting for, either annually?
About $60,000.
Okay. And do you have a person who's willing to do that work for $5,000 a month? Have you identified anybody? Have you looked at specifics?
Yeah, we have. We've looked at specifics of what other communities are doing. There are a few other cities throughout the state of Oregon that do provide a contract for lobby services, and there are some individuals and our companies that will do that. And so we're going to do an RFP and see what kind of interest there is out there and take a look at what our responses are.
Okay, thank you.
Tripp?
I mean, just kind of build on that. Are you expecting them to be complete 2,000 billable hours a year, or like are we renting a portion of a lobbyist's time?
It's a portion of the lobbyist time. I've even had conversations with some of the Southern Oregon city managers and municipalities, and they may also be interested in piggybacking and supporting and bolstering our contract, but we'll see if that comes to fruition. The key is that we want to make sure that we get in the queue and we start the process. Now, whether this is too much or too little or how many hours it does, this is our first shot at doing this, and we're looking forward to seeing what benefits it would provide.
I think getting a lobbyist is a great idea. 60,000 is extremely low for the cost of a lobbyist, so sharing makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure we're going to find somebody great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay. So the next one is policy and legislation, general program and operations. What does this consist of? And it's on page 119 of your budget book. These include general engineering, capital transfers, contingencies, and ending fund balance. So you might see some larger numbers here. So on page 120, you'll see more details on the general program operations. We have contractual services. You'll see a reduction in contractual services, and that reduction really represents a change in where we're allocating our expenses and revenues. The approximately $50,000, which you see here in the transfers out, represents the events that we support and we sponsor. Christmas tree, we do the Christmas tree lighting, we do Art Along the Road, and we do 4th of July. So we're changing that from contractual professional services and moving it to another budget line item, and that represents the reduction of the part of that $69,500. And then that represents the transfers out of $50,000. And then contingencies, you'll see contingencies are what we've done is you combine the ending fund balance and the contingencies, and that number has gone up a little bit from approximately $10,000 to $12,000, but we are moving that balanced to provide more flexibility for council by providing more money instead of $2 million in contingency, and providing more money like $12 million in contingency provides flexibility for council throughout the year to maybe take care of some emergencies or some unexpected program changes without going through a formal budget change.
I see that for fiscal year '26, you have the contingency down to 9 million. So what do you do with that 3 million from what's hoped this year?
I think that's likely, that might be likely what we're projecting from, say, for instance, an ending fund balance and a beginning fund balance, and how we're moving forward with what we have available to provide for contingency for council's future use.
So yeah, I would just buttress up with that with, I believe Sandy Novak pointed out on the first day too, that in the general fund, if we spend it all, we are spending 3 million more than we're bringing in.
Tripp?
So there is like a very meaningful legal distinction between a contingency and an unappropriated ending balance though, right?
Yes.
And we don't just rely on the ending balance for basically a rainy day fund. It also provides liquidity into the coming fiscal year. And there's really nothing other than its own, like, there's nothing in Robert's rules that would prevent a city council from spending down that contingency if they wanted to in the coming year, if we budgeted for 12 million entirely in contingency, right?
Contingency provides an opportunity for council to
Right.
allocate those resources throughout the budget year, yes, versus an ending fund balance or unappropriated, which
Right.
is more locked in.
So like how, I guess I'm just struggling to see how this is consistent with our financial policies, which specify ending fund balances as opposed to contingencies.
So I would say that it does provide council with more flexibility. Also, there is a 15% rule in ORS to where if they use more than 15% of the contingency, it has to be a public hearing.
But there's like a public hearing regardless, right? When the city council goes to, meet on a Wednesday and say, okay, we're gonna pass an ordinance, we're gonna move this money from contingency into this appropriation.
Technically, if it's just a transfer between categories, it does not need a public hearing. It just needs a passage of a resolution. So there are certain qualifications that if it reaches a percentage change in a category, or if it's a new category being proposed, then it does require a public hearing.
So how would, like, a underwriter view this? Does, for example, an investment bank see no difference between contingencies and ending fund balances when they go to float a bond for us?
I'm not an underwriter, but my understanding is they're one and the same. Other cities I worked at, they don't normally ever put unappropriated ending fund balance in the general fund. It normally all rolls up into contingency as a practice.
Sandy?
I think JC actually hit it, but JC hit it, but contingency is a budgetarily fund balance, and then when you close the books and you do your reports, then you have your fund, it's called fund balance. You're not going to be able to spend it without, up to 15% in, by resolution. Otherwise, you're going to have a full-on public meeting, and it becomes harder. And the county does now do unappropriated ending fund balance, and we are putting it down there because we're being weirdos and geeking out. But
The unappropriated ending balance, though, is exactly what the $8.1 million is in fiscal '24. So whereas the county is moving towards our previous MO, we're moving away from it?
so, well, the unappropriated ending fund balance, you're not, whether it's appropriated or contingency, you're not going to be able to spend it. It's not part of your spending appropriation without a resolution or an order. Like you're going to have to, and it's really hard, more than 15% of that to go spend it during the year. And then do you, by practice, bring the whole budget committee if you do more than 15% of contingency?
After the budget is adopted, the budget committee is not required at that step. That is a council action. So, yeah.
Right. But if we budgeted an unappropriated imbalance and council wanted to tap into that, we'd have to do a complete new supplemental budget, right? Bring back the budget committee, go through this whole process again, vet it out, to tap
No.
into the unappropriated ending balance, not to the contingency.
So no, once the budget is adopted, the budget committee does not intervene anymore. The only area for it to come back to the budget committee is if council is going to change an appropriation area above and beyond their authority at its adoption, and there's percentage variances that they would need to meet, that would require it to go back to the budget committee first.
Valerie?
Yeah, I just have a question, because I know, I think was it the first night that you asked for something to be sent out to those of us who, because the policy had
Yes,
changed?
This is exactly this area.
Exactly this area. Did we ever get that?
We're going to be going through that under number 4, discuss any general questions or information requests from the committee and the agenda later on tonight.
Okay, because this is exactly what we're
This
talking
is
about right now, so.
Exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Joel?
Above, under fiscal year '24 activity review, they are on track to be close to the amount budgeted for '24, and total expenditures for this division are expected to be within the adopted budget parameters. That was for '24. So '25, we have $12 million budgeted for contingencies, and I would guess that the total expenditures for this division are to be within the adopted budget parameters as we look ahead.
Is that a question?
Yes.
I think I'm understanding this question. Are you talking about between the 25 to 35% fund balance policy, which is the general funds fund
Yes.
balance policy? Correct.
Okay, so then, what I don't understand, if it's going to be within the parameters, that means that money will be spent, correct?
Contingencies you don't normally plan on spending.
We rarely spend contingencies. I think this year we spent contingencies $3,000 for the support of the Christmas parade. It went to
Sure.
council. Council had to approve that contingency. There may be some others that I'm missing, but you usually don't go and spend out of contingency. It
Okay,
provides just the flexibility for you to respond to unexpected expenses or program changes.
So if we don't spend that $12 million, then we're going to be, our total expenditures for this division are expected to be within the adopted budget parameters?
Yes,
The 25 to 35%? That includes the 12 million? Is that what I hear you saying?
That is correct. So the 12 million approximately makes up 30.5-ish% of the general fund.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
No. So,
Aaron?
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry to beat a dead horse, but it's just, we know we need liquidity going into the next year. What, like, from a parliamentary procedure sort of perspective, would stop the city council from ordering you two, as city management, to spend down the contingency in such a way that we might run out of cash, or that you could reasonably anticipate run out of cash before property taxes come in fiscal '25? Like, what mechanism, short of us recommending that we budget an unappropriated ending balance, would
so there's a
prevent that?
public process associated with changes greater than a certain percentage. And the public would also be one of those, and that's one of the reasons why we have these meetings, we have the opportunity for public comment, is for the public to be able to weigh in on those decisions. If council was 5 times, 6 times, 7 times throughout the year, spending down contingency at a 15% rate each time, that would be sending a signal to the public. We would need to notify and provide notice of these meetings and the actions that council would be taking.
Yeah, but the public can really only say something, and then maybe city council gets cold feet. But how many months does it take to stage a recall, and how fast could you reverse that ordinance before the money goes out the door? I mean, it's your folks' paychecks that might bounce if the cash isn't there to be had.
I think this is more of a, I don't think this is, you're asking a question that really isn't appropriate for staff to answer at this point.
Well, it's an Oregon budget law is not going to let you spend more than 15% of your fund balance, whether it's called contingency or fund balance, unless there is a bona fide emergency. There needs to be a bridge out or something.
So
If the budget committee, from an allocation of resources perspective, thinks that this is too risky, then the budget committee can make a recommendation to change the allocation and put a certain amount into ending fund balance and not the full amount in contingency. There we go.
So, I mean, that was going to be my suggestion, and to kind of answer the question, I don't know if Aaron and I are responsible for bad policy decisions.
Right, but we see how the public really shows up, right? In essence, like, this is the public input that is likely to happen ahead of such a decision.
So what I'm saying, so you get to the point of it, it's the point is the risk. If this budget committee believes that this is taking on too much risk from an allocation resource perspective, then you can modify that and determine what you believe would be the appropriate risk to put into contingency for council to have the flexibility to spend in an unanticipated expenditure or program change.
Now, Aaron.
Okay? Management services. This represents implementation of council policy and city goals, citywide administration, budget process and direction, some legislative support, internal and external public relations, and intergovernmental relations. So what we've got is management services represents 7% of actual program costs, and 2% is applied to capital project construction. So the administrative revenues are linked directly to other city departments. Say, for instance, a number of city departments are being reduced in nature. That means the administrative management services budget also is, by percentage-based, reduced in nature. If it gets larger, the administrative management services gets a little larger also. The funding mechanism, if us providing all of these services, does provide savings and reduces complexity and seems to be very reliable. It deals with things like payroll, personnel, finance, legal, and other supportive services. There is not much change associated with this. There's a small change in personnel services, which is what you'll see in other departments and divisions where there's a general change due to wages and wage increases and steps and PERS and health insurance. Just a minor change, reduction in materials and supplies, small increase in contractual and professional services and direct services. And the direct charges, you'll notice, if you recall, the direct charges in all the other divisions and departments that you've heard have had small increases also. That's because we're trying to set aside for building replacement and maintenance that is going to be needed in the future. Questions?
Josh?
Could you go back a slide real quick? Thank you. For the 7% and 2% for the applied, has that been a standard kind of line over the last few years? I don't remember, but has it moved much?
I don't think it's moved much. It maybe increased a little bit, or no, it's been increasing and decreasing it, but I forget. Maybe JC has a better idea of.
Yeah, so the 2% is standard that we've been able to live within our means for capital. The 7% is relatively new. I believe last year it was 6.5% of costs. And so again, just like every other department, inflation is hitting our internal services as well.
Other questions?
Okay. The next is legal services. Of course, any legal questions, contracts, land acquisitions, land use. It is our legal department, provides legal services and supports all of our divisions and departments along with counsel. Not much change here, small increase in personnel services due to what I've mentioned before. And other than that, that's about the only major change.
Questions?
Sorry. Do we anticipate bringing counsel back in-house in the coming fiscal year, or?
Yeah, we did. We brought a legal counsel back over a year ago, and we currently have a vacancy, and we're in recruitment for a new city attorney.
Right, so right now, we're using outside counsel?
Right now, we're
Okay.
using outside counsel to fill the gap.
But we're going to hopefully bring in
Yes,
someone in-house?
yeah, the intent is that we saw some benefit in having an in-house attorney, and so we're moving forward with that.
Adriana?
I just think a recommendation for future years would be finding funding for a legal assistant or a paralegal to support that city attorney.
Valerie?
I'm just going to go back to something that I said earlier that is a little bit frightening to me, is the grant specialist that we lost. And I know, and I heard that JC had some needs in the finance department, and that's where we were going. But I was wondering how that's handled now that we don't have a grant specialist. How are we handling, going out and having somebody go through that sort of thing and find out what grants are available? And then once again, we know how much goes into keeping track of all those grants. So can you let me know what the plans are there?
Yeah, sure, no problem. We have found that the grant specialist was valuable for the organization, but we also found that within each department and division, there was a lot of work that needed to be done within the departments and divisions. And the grant specialist was an excellent support mechanism, but at times was not able to be in some of the details associated with the reporting back to the agencies, et cetera. So the executive team discussed this in detail and recognized that due to other needs within finance department and the amount of work that we were already doing, that it wouldn't be much more flex for us to go ahead and have the departments just follow through with the actual submittal of some of the grants. They're already putting all the data together. They were before, so it's not a huge lift for them to go ahead and continue to do that. And we feel as though that, so far, we feel as though we're operating okay, and we still have an opportunity to provide grants, grant applications in a good fashion.
Is there a way? I know one of the things that I think Ashland is doing, they had actually hired a consultant or something to kind of, and I'm sure there's companies that do that just kind of feed grant opportunities to different departments. So, because oftentimes you don't have time when you're operating your department to be out looking for what grants might be available. And so I did hear that was something that Ashland was doing, was going out and actually paying a service to start feeding them some of that grant opportunity that they might be interested in getting. Because I just know how much is tied into grants now. I mean, the way that things have changed in the last 10 years, everything is a grant. And so it just seems to me it's kind of risky not being out there looking for those that might be out on the horizon.
So yeah, I'll answer this. We do have a finance section coming up here in the future. And we can dive more into this, but I will say yes, grants are a needed area for certain programs. But part of the problem is everybody is feeling that in the state. And so it is more competitive. And so there are opportunities maybe to use those resources that we have in the finance department a little bit differently. Like Aaron said, a lot of the departments are already pulling together the technical work for the grant applications. My plan is to still have an accountant, which you'll see on the finance page, to add to make sure that we're still supporting each of the departments as far as the financial reporting requirements. And as well as we do have a subscription to a software that we can actually pull down grant applications and what is out there currently.
Just a quick question.
Josh?
I want to do it at the right appropriate time, so if you want to wait until the finance section, that's perfectly fine, but when is that coming up?
Shortly after my presentations.
Okay.
Other questions?
HR. So Human Resources, a very busy group. It represents 4 FTE, the classification and compensation plans, recruitment and selection. We're very busy there. Labor relations and negotiations with our 4 collective bargaining agreements, administration of personnel rules, benefits administration, et cetera, and workers' comp program. So we have 71 active classifications with approximately 250 FTE. So they keep very busy. The budget really has not changed much at all. Small increase in personal services due to what I mentioned before, the representation of step increases, PERS, benefits, et cetera. A small decrease in contractual and professional services. The reduction is due to current salary survey and non-bargaining is currently underway, so we're seeing a reduction of need, so there's a reduction in what we're budgeting. And that concludes the human resources.
Questions? Rick?
On page 247, it shows the percentage of each department that uses human resources. Just in a general comment, is the turnover in each department standard, or do we have one department that seems to have more turnover than, I want to say, a national average?
Well, I would like to have the opportunity to have one of my esteemed colleagues come up, and since she's here, Mandy, our HR director, and she can respond to any questions when it comes to HR. Mandy?
Do I need to push a button?
No, you're live.
The turnover rates that we're seeing for each of the departments is consistent with what we're seeing in other markets. It's not a result of any internal issues. It's just your normal turnover for opportunity. Lots of retirements.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you. So we got administrative services, general program operations. This includes additional internal support, employee education, recognition, just general copies and services that we provide, postage, phone service, contingency also. It's relatively flat. Contractual and professional services are up a little bit. That includes postage, our financial audit, which really represents, there's an increase there, knowing that we're going to have that. Performance auditing, that's also in there for an additional cost. We want to try to look at providing some performance audits for community development and other areas within the organization to make sure that we are on the cutting edge of being a great service provider to our constituents.
Questions?
Oh, and capital outlay, that's the other one I want to mention, because from a percentage-wise, that's a big one. That just represents some additional copy machines that we're needing to get and some expenses and turnaround, because we got some stuff that's jamming and it needs to go. Okay. IT. IT provides technology, consultation, service, and support. They do a lot of work. Basically, IT is our go-to for anything electric. If it takes a battery, if it gets plugged in, whether it's their responsibility or not, we end up calling them, and they are amazing. We troubleshoot stuff. You know, IT has been absolutely amazing. Our whole team is amazing. One of the things we're wanting to do is the X team has discussed things, and we want to do a quarterly report to all of our colleagues and give them an update from an executive team standpoint. And we've brought IT in, and they're really providing some suggestions on how we can make it look good and be informative, and they're just the go-to for anything electronic besides the normal workstations that we're talking about also, and all the networking and cybersecurity, and they have their hands full doing a great job. So there is a total increase of $141,000. A large portion of that is some of that is due to contingency. We have some increases in contractual and professional services, and that's for cybersecurity. That's just costing additional dollars, and we want to make sure we try and stay ahead of the curve with that also. Transfers out, the additional transfers out just represents additional dollars to help with setting aside money for future needs when it comes to IT equipment.
Rick?
Aaron, at one point, we had Kaspersky for cybersecurity.
Yes.
And I don't know if we still have it or if we've changed to somebody else.
Well, again, I have another amazing esteemed colleague. Ken is here. And I know he would love to come up and brag about his program and answer that question.
So we stopped using Kaspersky about 3 years ago, I think, and we're using a different product now that is not based in Eastern Europe.
Thank you.
Other questions? Joel?
So when I look at the contingencies for all the administration, there's, each of them are a different percentage of the total revenue. And there's a reason for that. What's the reason?
Well, I guess we'd have to break that down to each one. As you noticed in the budget message that I did in the first night, we had a list of about 12 different departments and their contingencies. Some ranged from 25 to 35%, some, 15 to 25, and we can, maybe JC will be able to pull that page up in the budget book and we'll try to tell you some of the rationale. Again, it's based on sometimes when we're getting revenue in, what risk we're doing, and what we need to carry over for that.
So certainly that would explain some of it. The range I'm looking at here for administrative services ranges from 100% to, or almost 100%, 90%, 80% is in the contingency fund to, in this particular line item, it's about 14%. And so there's a wide variance in the contingency funds from the different, from information technology to facilities management to general program operations. There's a huge range there that isn't explained by those minute differences in the carryover.
On page 111, and there's some subtlety and nuances as to why we keep certain fund balances. So like IT is an internal service fund. It gets equal payments from the departments on a monthly basis, which is why the contingency or ending fund balance is set at a lower threshold because it has steady revenue, whereas the general fund, like we've talked before, it waits till November to get its tax rolls, where that has been a little bit higher than those kinds of funds.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't it also the case that the contingency for the entire administrative services bucket lives in that general program operations vertical that we're looking at right now? I mean, just cruising through, other than some.
So information technology is actually in the support services fund.
Right.
And so it's off the administrative services.
Okay,
But
sorry.
we do have separate funds called out specifically in that policy
Sorry.
for various reasons.
So is the contingency additional then?
Well, no, just a reminder to us as we're looking through, we're going administrative services, HR, general program operations, and sometimes the contingencies for the entire administrative services bucket live in a specific slide as opposed to being allocated to each individual program within.
Function.
Yeah, so you got to look at it more rolled up to assess the balances.
Other questions?
Okay, good. So we have workers' comp next, wage replacement, injury for illness care related to worker incidents. We do have insurance through our State Accident Insurance Fund Corporation, SAFE, and we do a great job with that. We also have an EAIP program, which is Employer at Injury Program, and we try to defray costs of injured employees and get them back to work on light duty as quick as possible to help with them getting back into the workforce, and it also saves the city some money. We do have a safety committee. Our safety committee is very active and great at assessing and taking a look at things. They review injuries and accidents. They're very active. They conduct job hazard analysis and recommendations. They do investigative work, conduct site inspections, and we're always able to find usually something that we can do to improve. Maybe it's not during one accident, but throughout the year, we're always finding opportunities to improve safety of our colleagues. And this safety committee is a requirement through Oregon advisory rules. So we have a small increase in the contractual and professional services. This represents medical services, legal services, third-party provider, membership, Crisis Go, et cetera, safe personnel training and insurance quarterly fees, which we're seeing an increase in that, and then a small increase in contingency. Other than that, the budget is pretty static.
Tripp?
If I recall correctly, over the past several years, we moved from a self-insured to modeled to safe. How are we doing on any sort of lingering liabilities from the self-insurance?
No, the self-insurance is pretty minimal, and it's kind of slowly decreasing over time. And it's kind of what we expected as far as that's working out. I guess the issue moving towards SAFE is we are part of the group now, and so we are kind of adhering to everybody else's claims as well.
When we were self-insured, were we reinsuring, or were we just rolling with it?
I don't know the exact answer to that question, but we kept a healthy fund balance to where I'm guessing that there was probably a little bit of that.
That's correct.
Other questions?
General insurance, the city is a member of what we call CCIS, City County Insurance Services. This is a group of cities years ago came together to create this, and we do general liability. We do the following there: physical damage, auto, cyber liability, etc., and that is all through CIS. There are some increases there, contractual and professional services. That includes legal services, general liability. What we're seeing here is general liability is increasing by 7%, property is increasing by 16%, auto liability has been increasing by 11%, and auto physical damage has increased by 13%. That's what represents the increases in costs, is the insurance is just going up.
Questions? Tripp?
So are we bearing any actual cost for the 22-23 settlement? So on 280, claim incurred in fiscal year 22-23, causing significant increase in the cost of general liability. Is any of that being paid directly from us to the claimant, or is that all running through the insurance company?
Sorry, that actually goes through the insurance company. It was a claim that, sorry, read my notes. It was regarding law enforcement officers, and it was a claim that we lost. And so, but it's still being paid through our insurance, but that's why our premiums are going up.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, only a 7% increase after a big claim, and with the insurance markets right now, that's pretty impressive on the city's point.
Other questions? Josh?
So property up 16, is that seems pretty significant. What was the driving factor around that?
Unfortunately, we're part of a pool. We, Grants Pass, have had 0 claims in property.
Cool.
It's been the pool itself, and that's why the premiums are going up.
Cool. And I saw previously that there was cyber security that was is that part of one of these buckets, or is there a separate cybersecurity and insurance that we've got?
It's a small amount. Actually, Ken, do you want to answer this one? Because this was the...
Because if I remember correctly, we had stopped it at one point.
We did. This one we paid just a very little bit. It's a totally minimal amount, just because the requirements for cyber liability have been so extreme that we have decided it was cost prohibitive to actually do anything more.
So how much are you covered for?
Oh, I think it's only like, I think our premium's $2,500, but I can't remember exactly how much that covers. I want to say like 50,000?
Oh my God.
50 or 100,000.
Yeah, so the first 15 minutes of a repair job are taken care of. That's good, yes.
Other questions?
We have Benefit Administration Fund. This is our fitness program. We have fitness reimbursement, wellness committee, et cetera. This is a very important piece of keeping our colleagues healthy in the workforce. We have a small reduction in contingency. Other than that, things are pretty flat.
Questions?
And then that concludes my administration department, and I have puppies and kittens to conclude because I want you all to have warm, fuzzy feelings when you're talking about the administration department.
So Trip. Contingency of 272 out of 355.
Okay, we now are ready to receive public comment or questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought administration. and
We
others.
have a couple, we got finance
I'm
coming
sorry.
up here, so.
I apologize.
Let me put that up. All right, folks, this is all yours. Let me take my goodies. You want to dance?
There were several of them like that.
So thank you, guys. So yes, we do have a few slides for finance and some other programs that don't necessarily fit in everybody's buckets. But before we get to that, I just wanted to briefly introduce Mindy Ellerman, who will walk you through the finance department. She is the reason why you have all of these beautiful books and all these numbers and everything organized in the fashion that it is. She does a lot of work to get it in the fashion that comes before you today. So I just wanted to give her a big shout out and a thank you, and I'll let her take away the description of the finance budget.
Good evening. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the department organization, what services we offer, our efficiencies, some trends and challenges, and then JC will get up and present the auxiliary funds. So finance is split into two sides. We have the accounting and financial reporting piece, which is my side of the house, and then we have our customer service, which is Kimberly Gasperson's side. And so my side, we deal with the budget, the audit, AP, payroll, AR, and numerous other activities. The customer service side does all of our utility billing, all the utility customer service to deal with the business tax, lodging tax, permits, parking tickets, liens. And here is our summary. Okay. So personnel services did go up, and it's pretty much the same as what Aaron said. It's insurance, it's PERS, and we have quite number of our employees are newer, so they're all moving through their steps, so that it contributes to that. We have a small savings in our materials and supplies. Our contractual and professional services did see a jump this year, and the biggest piece of that is our meter reading contract. The fees, the cost of doing it is just gone up a lot due to inflation, gas, insurance. Our direct charges, that is essentially the new facilities replacement fee for the finance piece of that. And then our transfers out is new, and that is the money that we are sending to LB for the future equipment replacement for the utility equipment. So our main changes, the biggest thing we have is that we are requesting the change to go from a grant specialist to an accountant. The accountant will be handling the grant accounting piece, which is obviously one of the most important pieces to make sure that we're in compliance and reporting everything the way we need to, our CFA, all of those good pieces. And then in contractual services, the other things that roll up into that is the meter reading, banking services, our investment advisors, and our software and printing. Are the efficiencies that we've built, primarily it comes from technology. We do check scanning, electronic payments, our citywide business software, the IVR that customer service has, so that's all the recorded phone, not the recorded phone lines, the payment, the phone payments that people can do. And then Kimberly has been working on implementing a web payment portal. So anyone will be able to go on and pay any city bill through our website. And that is coming here shortly. And then from the staffing side, we have a contract for stuffing all of our utility bills, and then our contract for water meter reading services. Trends and challenges. I think one of the biggest ones for us is that we are so reliant on technology that when something goes down, it causes some chaos for us for a little bit until we can get it up and running again. One of the other big ones is that we constantly have new requirements for budget and financial reporting, and also the compliance with all of our federal funds. ARPA comes with a lot of requirements, and now that we're getting congressional spending money, we're going to have some of the same kind of requirements. And then financial planning for public works and public safety. Questions?
Josh?
First, I want to go back to, you said staffing for stuffing envelopes? Like
All the utility bills.
all the utility bills. So there isn't a mechanical or an automated process that could take over that process?
We use Aspire.
Okay.
And a lot of the time too, there's inserts and other things that go in more than just fold and stuff.
There are other agencies that I worked for that contract that out or that service out. With it being with an Aspire contract, it is kind of hard to potentially change that.
Totally get it. So I just think that might be a good thing to maybe include as because if you're looking at more as an equally a community benefit kind of a piece, that's an important piece to call out as you develop these budgets. So thank you. Mm-hmm. I do want to get back to the change inside of the grant specialist. And I think one of the things that I'm particularly worried about is, and it gets back to a little bit of this lobby contract, and as somebody who's done that professionally and understands that world, when you go into lobbying, that isn't the place where you cast a net. You really get in line for a meal where you think you know where you're going to go and find it, and you want to make sure that you're getting to the front of the line. The grant writer really is the net that can go out and find other revenues to be able to pull in. And I think one of the things that I'm particularly worried about around your redesign is that you're kind of saying, well, everybody's got a role, and so they're all just going to kind of handle where they're at. But the problem is when it's everyone's job, it's no one's job. And you really want to be able to have somebody whose number one job when they wake up in the morning is, how do I go find a boatload of money to bring to the Rogue Valley? How do I make it so that we can get decided there? And I think you may want to really reassess how you're going to do it. That accountant position may make a ton of sense. I mean, we can have that discussion, but I am very worried that you don't have somebody that their number one job is to go find money.
I completely get where you're coming from. My response to that statement is we are falling behind the day-to-day requirements that are our financial reporting, our budget, our payroll, our accounts payable, AR. So part of my plan is we need to do the things that we need to legally obligated to do. Things like paid leave Oregon have not made processing payroll any easier. And so I'm trying to make it to where we can still provide the city the services that finance is needing to require at a minimum first.
And I want to comment that this is really not an allocation of resources discussion. This is truly a management discussion and doesn't belong at the Budget Committee. And I also want to state that we have experienced a number of issues that I'm not going to go into detail with regards to a grant administrator. One, a city our size, it's rare to have a specific grant administrator. Two, when you have a grant administrator, they're finding grants for us, but ultimately we are running so thin in operation, so thin that some of the grants we can't apply for because we don't have the availability from a staff perspective to run those grants. So we have made an informed decision from a management perspective that we need what we need, and that is right now we need an accountant to deal with the basics to get things done.
I'll just say that I'm not coming at this as a way to tell you how to run your office. I'm saying if there's an opportunity to leverage more dollars into the community, I think it's something that's worthy to try to figure out how to do.
Other questions? Rick?
At one point, we had a discussion a couple of years ago about meter reading, and the contract we had there was so inexpensive that we couldn't even consider looking at new meters. Where is that now today? I realize the whole topography changes.
The topography has changed. The meter reading company has had quite a few issues hiring good staff. We are their only customer that they have, pretty much south of the Portland metro area. And so that also makes them difficult to service us. So we are actually probably going to do an analysis this year. We've set aside a little bit of money to at least do the preliminary work to look at moving to AMI, which is Advanced Metering Infrastructure, because I don't think that we can really afford to take it in-house, just with the manpower and the ability. So it'd likely take us 2 people plus infrastructure. That's a pretty big ask, and I'm very worried that this company will not continue to support us, and we have to rebid this year. And they already, I want to say they went half again as much, if not nearly doubled their price last year, and they said if you can't meet this, we're going to have to walk away. And we were not in a position to allow them to walk away. So we're going to be doing a lot of analysis, and you guys will be seeing us soon.
Okay, thank you.
I just follow up on that, don't run away. Explain what the automated one is.
So it will be a system that connects via either cellular or some form of radio read to where we will either drive a route and that route will pick up those meters, or there will be fixed stations around that will read that infrastructure. That will lead to a lot of advancements where you can go on and look at what your water usage is today and make informed decisions about that. You'll be able to set up triggers that trigger you if there's a leak that is detected in your house. The other thing that's very nice, we will be able to do remote shutoffs and on. So a customer calls up and they need their water shut off, somebody in the office can do that now, as opposed to us having to call somebody back in, mobilize, drive out to the site and physically shut that off.
Other questions? You're on.
All right, now, before I move into the auxiliary and in the public employee retirement system, I do want to thank Mindy for coming up here and the rest of my finance staff. We are the self-proclaimed best department in the city, and I want everybody to remember that. Okay, so I have 4 funds to go through that are kind of in a little bit of a no man's land, and they fall under finance. So we have the lodging tax, a couple debt service, and the environmental waste fees fund. So first with the lodging tax fund, which is on page 287, the revenue that it collects is all lodging taxes. The expenditures in there is small admin direct charges, some indirect charges for transfers to capital, and then the contractual services are the auditing fee of the lodging tax entities, and we rotate those around every couple of years. The remainder of the resources are then transferred to tourism promotion, public safety, parks, economic development, downtown, lands and building projects. And if revenues come over budgets, we obviously do either a transfer next year or we do a budget adjustment before the end of the year. There are no contingencies in this fund as it's more or less a pass-through fund. So this is by Muni code, the allocation to each one of those programs. And one thing I'd like to point out is that 48% goes to the general fund. And then you'll see the percentages that correspond to public safety. Of the 40% up here, 28% goes to the direct marketing organization. And so in this $2.6 million, that's going to be about $719,000 to the DMO next year. And if you saw Tori's presentation a month or two ago, she is noticing a trend down, and that's regional, and I think we covered that in previous meetings. And so when we gave her this projection of revenues, she kind of thought that this was pretty close and accurate. The next fund is on page 289, and that's going to be our Bancroft Bond Fund.
Wait just a sec, would you? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was looking for questions and I didn't see any.
So the audit fee, does this fund have to be audited separately from the city's broader audit? I didn't get that.
So no, we actually send our auditors to a couple of our hotel entities out in the city and double check and make sure that they are complying with our Muni code.
Right. So then the kind of stereotypical question you always have to, do we have any sense of how much tax avoidance there might be out there among our lodging entrepreneurs?
And I'm guessing you're going with the short-term rentals.
Regardless, I mean, if I owned a hotel, I wouldn't want to pay it either, but, you know,
so the
easier to find me.
So the local hotels, we do notice that, you know, we have very little variance. Most of the time, it's an error just because they didn't mean to make it. It was just an error of how they added things up. But as far as the global picture of short-term rentals, I don't know if we have the exact amount. We do have it's called the, we basically have to have somebody call in and turn somebody in for code compliance. We don't necessarily go looking for them.
Josh.
I serve on the Housing Advisory Council. We've talked a little bit about this, and they haven't really studied exactly what that looks like, but they're just kind of starting to let people know the us not checking is coming to an end. So I think we'll start to get some better ideas here in the next year or so.
Valerie.
Yeah, I want to go back to where the number for the direct charges that you had for 23 and 24, and it jumps up 5,000. So I was just wondering what that was. That was, I guess it's also a lodging fund.
Oh, I know what that is. So this was actually charged the exact same rate of administration for, I think, the last 10 years. When I looked at that, that can't be possible with inflation and what it costs finance to actually move all this money around. So from this point forward, we're going to try and tie it to the revenues in which it brings in. And so there was an increase back to administration for that.
So it was just an increase in the percentage because you hadn't caught it through the years, is what you're saying?
That is correct.
Other questions?
So the next one is the Bancroft Fund. This is from borrowings to the finance LIDs, which is local improvement districts, the assessments, payments on assessments. The expenditures is the debt service on an interfund loan with the Solid Waste Capital Construction Fund, and it's paying back that each year. So basically any revenues that is received by through the LID billings, that goes back to solid wastewater capital. I'll stop there because that's all it is. It's a payback method. If there's any questions.
Questions?
Debt service for a general obligation bonds. This is on page 291. This is property taxes. However, this is delinquent public safety bond levy from 2019 that has already matured. Unfortunately, people aren't required to make their property tax payments, and so when the delinquents come in per ORS, it goes into this fund, and then it gets transferred into the general fund. Of the 2019, there's about $2,300 outstanding still in AR, and again, there's no timetable as far as when that'll come in, so we just appropriate the whole thing. If it does come in, it does, and if it doesn't, we'll just keep waiting. Any questions regarding this? The Environmental Waste Fees Fund, page 296. This is also a pass-through. So this is environmental program fee charged per ton of refuse collected by the sanitation haulers, Republic and SOS, and the transfers of station per the solid waste franchise agreements. And then the expenditure is an EPF fee pass-through to the City County Solid Waste Agency, which I believe they just changed their name, to coordinate expenditures for the cleanup sites. Not seeing anything, so I'll move on.
Any questions?
Oh,
You sparked the interest. It is actually, it was just renamed to the Josephine County Solid Waste Agency.
so now on page 306, we're going to talk about PERS. So just as a reminder, per council direction, we did set up a side account, EIF, with a 25% match with $2 million that we were going to amortize over 20 years, and that started on July 1st, 2023. The calculation came back. In the first biennium, we were getting a 1.07 discount on the biennium. In the first 10 months, we saw about $162,000 in savings. And as a reminder, that payback period is going to be a little bit over 12 years. And as another reminder, this is the second year of the PERS biennium, so there's not a lot of new information, but this is just a regurgitation of the previous year. These are our current PERS rates, and this is what our PERS rates have done over time. And unfortunately, in December of 2023, the PERS board announced the system of average contribution rate increase to climb by at least 1.5% in the next biennium, which is not necessarily something we look forward to. After that announcement, later in the March-April-ish timeframe, House Bill 4045 reduced the OPSERT police and fire retirement age from 60 to 55. It has not been necessarily portrayed if that's going to impact the rate as well. I would assume that if there's a shorter retirement age, that potentially is going to have an increase in costs. Again, we don't know what that is. There hasn't been an exact announcement of what that fallout might be, but that could be something that we're looking forward or looking towards in the future. And with that, I just want to say thanks again to Kimberly Gasperson, my customer service supervisor. She seems to always hire really well in the city, so well that other departments seem to steal our people. And then Mindy Ellerman, again, that you saw earlier. Is there any other questions that you guys have?
Questions? This is the time. Okay, now it's time to receive public comment or questions. Does anyone from the public want to ask questions or make comments? Seeing none, do we, as a committee, have any general questions or information that we want to get from staff?
And at this point, we'll also have JC go over the questions that were provided before. There should be some handouts, I think, on the dais for you, and JC will go through those.
So the first thing that was requested was Council Memorandum Number 025-2021, and that is the difference between general fund contingencies and ending fund balance. And again, I don't think there's anything new that we've learned through discussion today and what this memo potentially provides.
Just because I just got this, can we have a little bit of time to read it over?
Valerie?
I'm just saying I'd like a little bit of time to read it over because we've been discussing it and it's just right here on the dais. I looked for it today and didn't see it, so I would like a minute or two of quiet to get through. Thank you.
Okay.
I do have a question, and that's just, now that I understand it. In what year did we make the budget cuts? Was it 21, 22? I'm trying to think.
21 and 23, I believe.
21 and 23?
Yeah.
So in this case, when we changed it between 21 and 22, that was the first time that we had made the budget cuts, am I correct? That we still came back in with a 38% after we had made those cuts?
That was for this current fiscal year 24 that we're in, that we did the 28.5%.
The bigger percent, with the bigger cuts.
Before we weren't, yeah. Well, the first year cuts was almost $2 million. The second year cuts was, I think, 1.8 or something like that.
Right, but that was in.
And then we did the fund reserve change from 30 to
This last-
40%
yeah.
to 28.5% in this fiscal year 24 budget.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Go ahead, J.C.
Okay, so your next handout, there should be a short two-pager. That is the historical current property taxes for the permanent and levy receipts for the City of Greens Pass for the last 10 audited fiscal years. So what you'll have is the fiscal year, the revised budget, what the city actually received in property taxes for that fiscal year, the potential difference, and then the percentage of that budget. And then based on the tools that we use, we typically do get close. And so before I go to the bottom half, I will have you flip the page over. The highlighted portion that comes from our 2023 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, the assessed value change for the next fiscal year, which is 2024, the current year that we are in, should be a total increase of 3.3%, with approximately 1.85% from new construction and 1.45% coming from the assessed value change in existing properties. That is where I got the approximate 1.5% for the change, looking at where our current new construction may be, thinking that the current economic climate is about the same that it was last year. And so those are the different calculations between the 1.5% and the 3% that was requested. And you can see that the difference isn't that big.
Tripp?
So I can't really argue with how accurate your forecasts have been over the past 10 years. I think what's a little consternating is that, like, we can't see a revenue walk that goes from, we billed this many property taxes last year, and then we are going to budget for this many property taxes to be collected in the coming fiscal year. And the bridge from there is, okay, at every parcel that is going to get the maximum Measure 55 expansion, it's going to be this, or maximum 55 expansion will be this, less compression, plus any parcel that's under development, we anticipate here's the change property ratio, what we think that's going to land at, and what the revenues will be there, minus whatever gets siphoned away to the URA, or other things. And if you look at this, like, okay, half of the growth is coming from Measure 55 limits increasing, and half is coming from the change property ratio. In essence, like, it's just a little hard to gut check because it doesn't seem there's that much new development here relative to the total acreage of the city. And like, we have, as far as I can tell, plenty of room underneath the real market value for compression purposes. Proof is in the pudding. The forecasts are accurate, but it's just like, if you're just looking at a gut check, it seems a little odd for that to be a 50-50 share.
No, I totally get the comment. I don't know if there's a question there, and a thank you. But different entities I work for as far as cities, they do it differently. I've seen them not even look at the AV, just where have we received as far as property taxes the last 5 years, and take an average, especially in a kind of an even-keeled economic climate. We go above and beyond here and actually try and do and get the math and get as close as possible.
So are you aware of anybody who does it from like a parcel by parcel basis? Because, with the tools available in GIS right now, it should be a pretty straightforward exercise, I would think.
I think there's probably a little bit more to play than that, which is why it takes the county so long to consolidate that data. There's exemptions filed, there's changing of property hands, there's probably a lot more to it that would just be better served leaving it in the county's hands to do that workload.
They'll do a lovely presentation, sorry. They'll do a lovely presentation a week from tomorrow night, the assessor will. Teach you everything you want to know about it.
You can go for me.
More questions?
Okay, and so the last handout we have is in response to maybe one of the handouts that we got on last Thursday. This is the historical, I misspelled it, you can tell, general fund budget versus actual expenditures over the last 10 years for the general fund. And on the left, it has fiscal year. The next column is the revised and then actual, and I put an asterisk next to those numbers because these are the approximate non-restrictive operating amounts, removing contingency as well as restricted program amounts of building and safety and tourism promotion. So building and safety and tourism promotion has restricted funds, so it shouldn't be part of this calculation. And I put approximate in there because there's probably some grant funding sprinkled within these last 10 years in multiple different programs, so this is an approximation. And you can see the difference. You can see that the city's done very well as far as being good stewards of its funds. And one thing I wanted to point out on the very far right, when it did have savings, the city was actually utilizing transfers out to capital projects. Since the last few years, 2021 to 2022, we did the budget cuts. And you can see that there's kind of a little bit more financial uncertainty maybe in some of these numbers. As I know in my department, I left positions open not knowing where the budget was going to be. And so it's hard to hire somebody potentially if you know that there is a looming budget cut coming. So that could probably explain the last few years. And you can see that the transfers out over the last few years really have dwindled. And what we are currently using those savings for year in and year out is to feed operations of the next year. If there's any questions, I'll take those.
I do have a question, because like I said, I just kind of want to, I'm trying to input that thing about the difference between the contingencies and the ending balance and wrap it all together into here. I see where, indeed, you didn't move things to capital because we had made budget cuts, so there was not as much money to move at the end. Is that, so basically, what I'm trying to clarify is that I understand the difference between contingency is what you could write a supplemental budget for. So, and we can't go into, we have to make a supplemental budget if we go into contingencies during the year, correct? And the ending fund balance is more protected. And so as it's more protected, that's what we have to do the public hearing if we do a ending fund balance. But at the end, do they both end up going, just roll over, or explain that to me?
So let me back up to go forward. A contingency and an unappropriated ending fund balance are both ending fund balances.
Okay. So
they are just what's left over.
Okay.
The manner in which you can move the monies out of a contingency and unappropriated fund balance are two different things.
Okay.
They both, though, require some council action to move them. The unappropriated fund balance, though, you're required to have a natural disaster to access those funds.
And those are during the year. So that's during the year, if you needed to access those funds, that's the means by which you do that.
Correct.
Okay.
And I would say council puts other things like policy, and staff provides things like the GFOA rethinking reserves memo talking about needing to keep reserves in the general fund to help with future loan opportunities that we may be engaging for several different projects. So giving council the flexibility to move that around in contingency, I felt is the best use of the classification for this year, given the current climate and moving the fund balance policy from the 30-40 to the 25-35.
Okay. And what's left at the end of the year after everything, that's what goes into and rolls over into the following year, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Just trying to get straight in my hair.
Tripp.
So if council were somehow to find a new stream of revenue sometime in the next fiscal year, could they spend any of that, given that that revenue hasn't been identified in this budget and is therefore not appropriated yet?
Yes, it all depends. There's different revenue streams that council can spend without authority from the public. Those are normally like instilling like a new bond. Like you don't have to go to the public to spend those monies.
Let's say it's a tax.
But potentially if you're adding a new revenue source midstream, you do need to come with a supplemental budget. It's normally classified as a change to the budget, not known at the time of the preparation.
Right, and so would the treatment of all of our ending balances as contingencies this year eliminate the need for that supplemental budget if somehow council were to find revenues midstream?
No. It depends on the classification and the area in which it goes into, which program too. So the program needs to have enough spending authority to be able to do that. So yes, you may be able to get away with moving it through contingencies, but depending on the revenue stream, it may just be easier to do a public hearing and classify the revenue in and the expenditure out in the appropriate program.
Other questions?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you. I'm an idiot, so I just want to try to like walk this through here. So I'm looking at 2023, and I'm a little confused here. Page 80, on the big thing here, page 83. But it's 2023. So at the bottom it says here that the final budget was 9 million and change, but the actual was 17 and a half that we actually got. And then it says variance to the final budget was 8 million and change. So does that mean that you didn't spend $8 million in contingencies and that's where that came from? That, like, I'm just trying to understand what that difference is, what that variance really means from budgeted to non-budgeted.
Oh, that would be your unappropriated ending fund balance,
Yes.
the difference there. And so it's not going to be shown on the financials as a category. And so there probably was the 8 million or so that was in the unappropriated category. So, but when you classify the ending fund balance, there's a little bit more nuance in there because there's some restricted balance in the 17 million too. So it's not like we just got $9 million extra. I think what you're probably needing to look at more is the current revenues and expenditures. That top area is kind of what you did in the current year.
So go ahead.
So your revenues came in 1.2 higher.
Got it.
And your expenses came in 6.8 lower. You had.
Got it.
So therefore, that's $8 million.
So that's your $8 million that extra that kind of popped up. So if you go back in previous years, we got 7 million the year before that, 9, 5 in 2020. So is that, and so that's that, right?
So that is the change to budget. I would say the column next to it is the current year, what it did. So the current year's revenues less the current year's expenditures. And so you can see on 2023, there's a $1.5 million deficit. And in 2022, there's about a $400,000 deficit in the current revenues. But I will say there's some transfers in and some subtleties because it gets money back in from the lodging tax funds. There's probably, I think in here, there's the building and safety services, there's tourism that you should be hiving out as far as revenues and expenditures as well. So it's not 100% straightforward in what I'm showing you, and it's close as I can get to kind of hopefully make it as easy as possible.
No, and I appreciate it. And I don't want you to like consider that I'm criticizing you for being conservative here and really kind of making, I think any good CFO worth their salt, that's what they should do. I guess what I'm really kind of trying to highlight here, or to really try to understand is, as somebody who's looking to maximize the amount of services that we can get, is there more wiggle room inside of here than what, you know, is really inside of here? And I think that was what I was getting at with the previous question that was there. And really kind of with the changes that we've made is, are we really using all the flexibility that we currently have? From your perspective as CFO, you're like, no, we need to err on the side of you know, as conservative as possible. Hoorah, that's absolutely what you need to do. But I do think understanding that and understanding that exercise does help council to then say, hey, maybe there's a little more flexibility where we can be a little more risky, where we can kind of push you. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take away your sleep, but I do think that that's important for the rest of us to sleep safely, that we've got enough police and fire to make sure that we're taken care of. So that's the only reason I'm really trying to like highlight this here.
So yes, as the current finance director, I would err on the side of caution, as these are public funds. And then there's people when you equate the general fund, because most of the general fund services we're talking about, they are people that we employ. And so yes, we could be more risky. I know we see these 7-8% averages here. But let's say I take away the 7-8% from each of the departments. I'm minimizing the flexibility that they have, as well as if they were to become fully staffed. Now they're going to be over that 7 or 8% potential savings that they would have. So yeah, you could be more risky and pull that in and say, well, now we've actually seen 92% of everybody's job and budget as such. I wouldn't recommend that. Because that would, yes, you could add to the budget and add people, because that would be your savings, right? And we could do the math that way. But again, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as recommending that as far as presenting a budget.
Tripp?
I mean, doesn't it even go a little further than that as far as lack of flexibility? If we're running 6% in the current year favorable to budget, like we got to remember all those expenses that we just paid for are going to be 6% more expensive next year. So like the savings themselves, and this is how this has played out over the past couple of years, right? Really aren't enough to cover the inflation just on the current expenditures carried forward, right? Or if they are sufficient, it's on a pretty thin razor's edge.
So let me say it back in a different way to where maybe non-accountants will understand. Everybody's been to the grocery store. It's like walking into the grocery store with $100 and you spend 90 of it, and you're really banking that you spend 90 on it every trip in, because we're using the $10 to combat some of those increases for the next year, for the next trip back into the grocery store, the next budget year.
And we're budgeting.
Sandy?
And we're budgeting $3 million over our current year revenues.
That is correct, and that's part of been the process of, we have been really good and diligent in managing the savings. It is definitely staff's position that it's hard to count on that moving forward.
Other questions? Okay, I think we're ready to vote on the programs the budget approval of the programs we talked about tonight. So could I get a motion to do that?
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion and a second.
Point of
I
order,
assume you're
sorry.
seconding.
No, I'm not seconding.
I'm sorry.
I have a point of order. I believe there was one other thing that was approved for consideration for a question from the police chief.
Oh, that was, I believe you're right, we had a little bit of confusion with that, but the point was, and I guess I can address this, the question was, what does the chief need to hire the additional vacancies that he has? And it's not a resource issue. It's the individual vacancies that are occurring not only in public safety, they're occurring in CD, they're occurring in public works, they're occurring in administration. We just had an all-day interview for someone in utility billing. It's a normal occurrence thing. It's not an allocation of resource issue. So we are utilizing our tools that we have from a management perspective to do what we can to hire and recruit and have competitive wages that we work through council on to establish parameters for our collective bargaining agreements. From an allocation of resource standpoint, we didn't see any link to the question. The question is more recruitment and retention opportunities and skills, and I'm sure Mandy can come up and talk about what our recruitment and retention opportunities are and how we do that. But it's not a lack of resources. The police department is currently a little under budget. So it's not a budget issue. It's not an allocation of resources issue. It's an issue of someone retires or they move to a new position, which is great, and we don't hire a lateral, but we have to hire someone or we have to hire someone and train someone and that kind of thing. So I was trying to link the question to allocation of resources. It's not, and so our response to that question is it's not an allocation of resource issue. It's an internal recruitment and retention and just normal attrition of staff as they work through the many things that each department is working on, not just the chief of police.
More discussion?
I have a discussion,
Valerie?
and I just want to go back to that a little bit, because I kind of feel like the Budget Committee does have some say. Number one, they're kind of the public that comes in to the council to give ideas and thoughts. And I feel like if they're from the public, because what I'm hearing from the public is the public kind of saying, wow, and what we've heard over and over is where we are for police fire being an issue, police fire being an issue, police fire being an issue. So if that's the message that we have sent out to the public, that we are in dire need of police and fire, and then we come into a budget session and we don't deal with that, I don't think we're doing anybody and ourselves any favor. So that's my argument as to why that really needs to be discussed.
So, and I'm 100% for that. So then the question needs to be, how do we allocate resources, additional resources, to increase the budget so we can hire additional FTE? Mm-hmm. And I'm more than willing, and that is an appropriate discussion. But a discussion on our recruit and retention policy, when it doesn't associate with allocation of resources, is not within the realm of the Budget Committee. And there's a distinction between the two, and I just wanted to clarify. The question was a distinction that was not in the realm of an allocation of resources, but in an overall organizational recruitment and retention policies. And in discussing with the chief, and discussing with HR, and discussing with the spirit of the question, unless I was missing the spirit of the question, if the question is, what can this Budget Committee do if there's anything to allocate resources to provide for additional flexibility to hire more FTE, then let's have that discussion.
Okay. And if we're hearing from the public, which we hear over and over again, is that you have a city staff of this, why do you always go after police and fire? That's the thing that I guess what you're saying is that's a council decision to make that, say that, at this point in time, we need more money in this particular department because that's where we really feel crunched. And so you're saying it's a policy decision, not a budget decision. And I get that, but I also feel that we have so much wealth of financial knowledge in this room that it helps me as a counselor, who we know how long it takes me to wrap my head around this financial business. I just hate to waste this opportunity to talk about that. And those are my thoughts.
Tripp?
So just from my reading of the budget documents, the reason why police and fire, quote unquote, being gone after is because they're where the people are and you're spending money on people. I mean, after the past couple of meetings, I think it's just as obvious that we're also going after the longevity of our sewer pipes, but people don't see how old the pipe in the ground is. And those have dedicated revenue streams versus general fund revenues being what they are means you have to cut within that vertical.
Josh?
I'll say that I appreciate the city manager's response. I will just say, though, that this board voted for a response, and I think in future attempts, if the board votes for a response, there should be something written, or I think where you said what was the spirit of the question was definitely what you kind of outlined and said, okay, great, let's have a conversation. So either a reach out to the budget committee member who made the presentation or something along those lines to be able to further clarify, because it is a little dismissive to not acknowledge it and then, you know, basically say, well, we decided that we couldn't answer it. I mean, you should have at least acknowledged it. So just for future reference.
More discussion.
I don't recall that request passing. I think it was 7-2.
It was 8-2.
It was 8-2, okay. Don't we need 9?
Nope, because we are at 15.
Talk into the microphone, please.
Okay, don't do it.
No, not you, Tripp.
Oh, I was like, hi.
We do not need 9 because we are 15 instead of 16.
And I remember that being a discussion that I don't think was clearly answered. I know that in the beginning of this entire presentation was 999, and then there was a comment about, okay, 15, so is it going to be 8? And I don't think that was actually clear. Does anybody have an answer? I guess
So
it's
we
kind of up in
have,
the air.
we looked into that, and it is, when there's a vacancy on the budget committee and the vacancy is of a council member, say for instance, there's an open council seat, then there still needs to be 9 to pass. When there's a vacancy in the citizen at large, then it can go down to the number 8.
Okay. Are we now ready to vote for a tentative budget approval of programs we discussed today?
So
Sandy?
moved. So moved.
Is there a second somewhere?
I'll
Thank you,
second.
Joel. Okay, more discussion on the programs we talked about today. Okay,
I just
so,
had- I just had one
go ahead, Joel.
I appreciate Josh's question, and I think as we put the budget together, we asked the chief, did those allocation of resources cover the filling of all the existing vacant positions in his department? And the police chief, respectfully, as always, said yes. Now, the question that was not asked was, does this budget cover additional positions that could be hired? That question wasn't asked. And the existing budget level that we have. So before we vote, I would just like to ask that question of management and the chief. Given the budget that we approved tentatively for public safety and for the fire folks, does that budget also cover any new, would cover any new additional positions?
So the current budget as presented to you is as mentioned in the first meeting during the budget message, it doesn't provide any additional FTE in police, fire, or general services, parks, et cetera. Part of that discussion occurred also at a council level when they were looking at the utility fee. There was great discussion at the council level on what is it going to take to create a fee that would provide an opportunity to stabilize the services that we have today. We had discussions about what would it look like if we did something different than $12 per single family dwelling unit, if you may recall. But from a policy perspective, City Council established a fee that provided an opportunity for us to maintain the current service levels. We did have a brief discussion about reducing levels. We had a discussion about what it would take to increase the fee, and we talked about it being about a $17 per month fee to provide for 9 additional FTE. The choice that council provided was an implementation of a $12 utility fee for status quo service levels. So this budget represents council policy of holding the line on service level with regards to FT and direct relation to the utility fee that has recently been implemented.
So if I understand you correctly, Aaron, and I don't want to talk too much here, you need to ask your questions. The existing budget will allow the chief to fill vacant positions this year in the existing organization. It will not, unless council gets additional resources, fill additional positions in either fire or police.
Yeah, no, that is correct, but I also want to broaden that because we're talking general fund. Police and fire are just 2 departments in general fund, and so that goes the same for parks, for community development, for rec. So that statement is the same. It is status quo for all of the general fund departments.
I know. Did you have a question first?
Valerie?
Yeah, my question is, it's the same thing, because I've had talks, and I'm still a little clear, because we jumped all over the place in terms of, this, or no, way over here, this, and maybe. So what I'm seeing is the current position that is right now, Todd Moran, captain, retired, and so that's being filled, correct, in this budget. We also had some existing vacancies that are being filled. And in the fire, basically the only position that will return would be the fire chief, which we're trying to hire. Am I correct? I just want to clarify, because we have been all over the place. I think you could ask any of council people. So I really want clarification on exactly what we're doing and how does that do, because it seems to me that we also did put money back into the vehicle replacement. So that's included in this budget that we're adopting. So we are putting back in there for that, as well as, what did you just say?
Yeah, the vehicle replacement, et cetera. So Councilor, you are correct. This budget represents, when we did the $2 million cut and the $1.8 million cut in 2023, there were some cuts that were temporary in nature. And so what we were able to do when council increased the new utility fee for public safety to $12, it provided an opportunity for us also to rebuild back in some funds for our fleet replacement, which we extended out really realistically way past the true life expectancy of a police vehicle, et cetera. We also were able to refill some of the positions that were temporarily held, and the chief will go into those from a police perspective. From a fire perspective, I can tell you that we are still no change to fire from an FTE perspective. We still have the resources for a fire chief and for the associated command staff as we have seen in the future. So, and no changes or reductions from a fire personnel level based on the proposed budget. And the chief can talk about what the proposed budget represents from a standpoint of what we temporarily cut in 23 to what this budget represents as a fill.
But the fleet replacement also for fire was replaced?
Yes, it was fleet replacement for all including parks also. It was fleet replacement for all of our fleet vehicles, which we did fully extend realistically above and beyond what a realistic replacement value is.
Chief, please.
Yeah, I think the city manager hit the nail on the head. I think for you, Councilor, Todd Moran's position has been filled, thank goodness. We have 2 captains in place now, and we are going to rebuild an additional lieutenant position, and that will open up positions throughout the organization. But for the purpose of this conversation, if you look in terms of the number 57 for cops, that's what we have allocated for fiscal 25. And I spoke to the committee during my presentation on the 7th, and I shared, I believe, 8 would be the number of vacancies that we're trying to fill. And we're always trying to fill vacancies. It's very difficult to hire background and trained cops to be successful within our organization. There's good news, though. The good news is we have lateral candidates that are interested in Grants Pass. and we court them aggressively. And I think even to answer Mr. Balak, thank you. Can I call you Josh? Thank you, much easier. To answer your question too, is with the resources we have at hand in partnership with our teammates within the HR department, we're working diligently to recruit and retain good people. We're working on a video campaign, short videos, so we can share what we have going on here to other departments even here in Oregon to keep that recruitment process going, to outreach what we have in Oregon to different states. We have a person interested in our department from the state of Virginia, from the state of Florida, and two in Oregon. I almost gave up the cities. I didn't want to give up the cities. But we have people that are interested, and they're good people that will complement what we already have going on here. We recently announced a entry-level police officer opening that went out yesterday, I believe. So we will test for that position in a couple of weeks. And we're hard on ourselves. We say to ourselves, how come we haven't been successful? What are we doing wrong? And I think it's just the market in general. But we take each recruitment back to the drawing board, and we'll do it a little bit differently this time around. Also, too, I would say that we're probably one of the few police agencies in the country that are hiring via Zoom or Skype or online. And we're pretty good at recognizing talent when we see it, whether it be in front of us or on a video screen. And what we have going for us within the PD is that everybody gets a background. And much like a CIA background, we're going to look deep into you. And if what we thought we saw is not there, you won't pass background. That's just the way it is. So we're trying to cut up, shore up, make it a little bit better for our team so we can get people in seats and patrol cars and get them out there. But I'm confident we're going to get those positions filled this year.
And one other thing that the chief talks about, we all talk about, everyone sitting at the table there, the X team talks about, all of our leads team and supervisors talk about and recognize and support, is sometimes it is more difficult to hire because we're not just going to hire someone, we're going to hire the right person with the spark to be a proven leader and to grow their leadership within the organization, and that takes longer. We will hire the right person. If it means waiting 2 or 3 months to get the right person in, then that's an opening we're going to have to deal with because we want to make sure the right person is in there that will help join and build our culture.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what the city manager just said, typically when folks come to my office for a chief's interview, it's not quite a rubber stamp, but it's pretty close to it. This last round, not everybody made it, and that's kind of unheard of. In my tenure here, it's only been 5 years, but I've had the unfortunate, not pleasure, but it's been unfortunate that I've had to terminate people along the way. And we got to catch it early so we don't have that problem in 3 to 5 or 10 years.
Adriana?
So I did think your motion didn't pass, Josh, because I thought it was 7-2. But going on what Valerie said with the public opinion, what I kind of think I understood from your question or request was we are hearing a request for additional openings, additional FTEs, and then looking at the budget and seeing a vacancy. So I understood it to kind of, maybe you're wanting to understand the gap there. Why are we asking for additional FTEs if we have the opening? And I think I responded with, getting additional FTEs to increase our abilities to serve. So I don't know if you wanted to maybe respond to what I thought I was understanding, and maybe we can all be on the same page.
Sure. So, and Chief, please, you're doing an amazing job. That's not what it was. And really, what the spirit of what I was trying to get at is, are the tools in the toolkit we could start to do? You had mentioned, maybe a recruitment or retention type of professional. Is that something you want to do? One of the things that I'm starting to think about here is, if you have such a high standard of police that you're bringing in, which is amazing, it's creating a longer vacancy run out. So that basically means, what are we budgeting, 63 total is that right? Or whatever the number is for
As
police?
far as for cops?
For cops for this year?
57.
57, so 57, but you really only can kind of keep 55 of them filled because retirements and a longer, more vetting process.
Yep.
Well, then in actuality, you're really operating with a 55 police force, not a 57. So it's those type of like budgeting kind of questions that I kind of go, okay, like, can we get you to maximum capacity and hold you at maximum capacity, or is the natural state really this, 7 to 8 people that are just kind of positions that are just kind of permanently open
Yeah.
because of the nature of the job? And that's effectively what I was trying to figure
Yeah,
out.
and I absolutely, I hear what you're saying, and Aaron and I have talked about this. This is a year we're going to do overhiring. We're going to utilize that. I think I made the remark during my presentation, overhiring 10 people would be great. I know that would never happen, but why not throw it out there? But when I say overhiring a few people, there's another side to the story. Our folks go out on protected leave, FMLA, OFLA. They get hurt. We saw our insurance presentation tonight. My department happens to be a big part of that. And we're in a litigious environment, and our folks get hurt, and our folks still want to take vacation on top of that too, and we yell and scream and say, please don't take 2 weeks off, we kind of need you. But I think we're on a good trajectory this year. We're pretty focused. And it's also too, not just Grants Pass PD. The state sets a standard, so I can't dip below the standard, but we also like to take it up a little bit higher as well.
Joel?
I'll pass.
Valerie?
One thing I'm going to ask, and this is just because, looking at numbers, and I get it. I mean, like I said, I think that's part of the problem. And then one time, and I'll give you a bad time, JC, the one time you guys came to us and started talking about 17 and 19 and what we needed down the road, that just kind of was like getting hit with a fire hose, like, oh my gosh, that I think threw some of us, our brains into alarm system for a while. But we also have people that aren't cops that we are missing. And so
Yes, ma'am.
technically in our police department, I think we have 67 and a half or 67.5 positions. And so I'm clarifying that the crime analyst is not coming back. Are they coming back? Those are the sorts of things that I'm unsure of. As I know, the cops on the street are what people are crying for, and we all know that. But there's kind of the background people also that puts us up at a higher number. So
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly where you're going with this, Counselor. I apologize for not hitting on it. We have 94.5 FTE. We did lose a crime analyst, and we are not getting that crime analyst back. We've in the past lost a police officer. We used to have 58 FTE police officers. We only have 57 moving forward. We used to have more record specialists. We're still down a record specialist, and we are still down a 911 dispatcher. And if you recall from my presentation the other day, Grants Pass PD record specialists are one of the only groups in Oregon PDs that take calls for service as well and enter that into the CAD and send it out to our troops in the field.
but those positions are not being filled. And so I think that's
Yes, ma'am.
where some of us get confused, is because we hear those, and then it's just like, well, are they being funded or are they not by this budget? So that's why I think, and I thank you, Joel, for bringing up clarification with what exactly is in this budget and isn't. So thank you.
Sandy?
I wanted to go back to your first night's presentation. You were talking about the, and I forget the name of it, how many officers you have on duty at any time. How did you come up with that number? And that is the direct reason why the overtime is so high?
Yes and no. So how do you come up with minimum staffing levels? It's more complicated than tonight, but for all intents and purposes, let's just imagine that the city of Grants Pass has, each officer might handle 10 or 12 calls a day. One officer, 10 or 12 calls a day, and some of those calls might include menacing, domestic violence, certain types of assaults, missing people, etc., homicide. You can go into the whole thing. You have to be ready to manage 3 quasi-critical incidents at any one time. Now, that would mean you only send 2 officers to 3 calls. You can't do that. That will not happen. On paper, it sounds good. But on the regular, if there's a menacing, we want to have probably 4 cops at that call. But we need to be able to support other crises that's happening within the community. In a perfect world, we should have minimum staffing of 8 cops per shift, 24/7. We don't have that. We actually dropped to a minimum staffing level of 5 officers during the wee hours of the morning and some of the early hours of the day. That's concerning to me because it tasks our cops to do a lot more with less, and they might do something they wouldn't normally do unless they had additional backup with them. It's normal that police officers want to resolve the problem and move on to the next one, So when you combine 54,000 calls per year, plus the call type, the size of the city, the service level the citizens need, we should be more like 8 minimum staffing. And when we did our surveys of past, our ICMA studies, I think it was more like a sergeant plus 8 as minimum staffing levels. We're not going to get there anytime soon. We have to build up to that. And then can you repeat the second part of your question? I lost track of it.
My concern was the 60-hour
overtime.
work weeks.
Yeah, it's my concern too. And it's not necessarily 60-hour work week. I might have misspoke. We work 80-hour work week, so a 2-week period. So our officers are dealing with extra shifts and overtime within their 2-week work pay period. Our dispatchers are doing the same thing. Our dispatchers work a heck of a lot of overtime. And unfortunately, when you're in the emergency services business, and remember, we are a no-strike organization, we can't just walk out. Somebody has to be available to answer those calls for service. And when they come to this department, they all know what they're walking into. And I make sure they know that, me included. And I think we're going to get back to a better place, but that's kind of the trajectory when it comes to overtime.
Tripp?
Getting back to the budget committee's province allocation of resources, I mean, at least to me, it's been pretty clear throughout this whole 3 meetings that every presenter has established that the budget that we're looking at has no vacancy credit. Every single position in the book is funded, and that's obvious in the dollars and cents. And the motion on the table not only does that, but provides very large contingency that, as far as I can tell, can be used for new programming if council so desires. The danger here, it's always tempting to think like, hey, maybe when you're looking at vacancies, for example, maybe if we just spend a little bit more money, we can fill those and actually get the programming we paid for. But like the historical financial results are showing that we're barely keeping up, if we're keeping up at all. And we're in a very tenuous situation in that it's not that much of a stretch to say that if we were to like put more resources into recruitment and they were successful, all we're going to do is meet the day when revenue hits us just that much quicker. Maybe one more budget cycle, hopefully not apropos of our comments about the unallocated ending balance mid-budget. But as presented to us, if we approve the budget as we've moved to, council will have that decision to make for themselves.
More discussion? Okay. Those in favor? Josh?
So I just want to put on the record, and I think Tripp's summarizing this really well. Also, I feel like Public Works has gotten off way too easy, and we should really pick on them a little more, but that's another thing altogether. There are two things that I thank you for the chief for coming up and kind of explaining. Like, we want to make sure that you're getting your full your full allocation, that you've got the resources you need to keep doing the amazing job you're doing. So that is the only like real direction that we're really trying to get at, because there are these other larger political conversations that are happening around, do we raise taxes? How do we generate more funds? And I think it's really hard to make those types of decisions in a vacuum around this budget and these other conversations that are going on. So looking for clarity around how well our services are working, I think is very important. And thus having your positions filled or understanding how those positions are filled on a routine basis allows the council and the community to make a more educated decision. So that's the only reason I was really bringing that up. I will also say though, to get back to one of the other conversations, I understand that grants and other things are very expensive and difficult to deal with, and that they come with strings attached. My goodness, I work in the healthcare industry. Let me tell you, I know about strings attached. But it's also the place where you can really start to build out more revenues in really more creative ways and really start to leverage some other things. And I think it's something worth the council to really consider. If the administration's feeling overwhelmed to be able to take on new grants, then maybe that is a question where you say, okay, do we need to have something to rework how we're doing the administration so that we can take on these more opportunities? Because just like a city, the more a city grows, the more revenues you grow. Kind of that grant writing process, same thing. If you build your administration out, you can get more grants and you can build more revenues. So I think it's something worth to consider as the council goes to consider the final budget. And I just wanted to put those two markers out there before we took the final vote. Thank you.
More discussion? Okay, when we vote for this, I would like you to individually say who you are and vote for or against it, please. Start with Sandy.
So I want to make sure, do we have a motion and second on the table?
We do.
Yes.
Okay, all right, and this is for this tentative. I'm going to get up again and provide I need to discuss with you recommendation on taxes and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's next.
separate.
This is just for the budget that we talked about tonight.
Tonight.
Yeah.
Tonight. So Sandy and yes.
Josh and yes.
Vanessa Ogier, yes.
Trip Androy, yes.
Joel King, yes.
Adriana Reinhardt, yes.
Rick Riker, yes.
Tom Brandis, yes.
Valerie Lovelace, yes.
Kurt Collins, yes.
And Chair,
Robert Grossius, yes.
Oh, thank you. Josh, did you vote yes or no?
I voted yes.
Thank you. Okay, so it's unanimous, it passes. Thank you. Okay.
All right, so we're now at the part of the evening, before we move on to you as a group wearing a different hat, concluding as the Budget Committee itself, a recap of where we are today. This is for budget year fiscal year 25. The phases that we've gone through, we're in phase 3 where we're looking at adoption of moving towards approval of the budget through the Budget Committee on phase 2. We've had 3 meetings. What we're needing now from you as a phase 2 approach is to approve the budget. Final motions and actions to complete the city's budget. The committee requirements are to approve the budget. 1, approve the budget in total, which is on page 36. And 2, approve the property tax rates, which is on page 50. There's 2 property tax rates that we're looking at you approving, and that is a permanent property tax rate of $4.13 per thousand and our public safety operating levy at $1.79. And here are a sample motion for approving the budget, and then also I have sample motions for the levying of the taxes. But first on page 36 is the removal of the approving the budget.
Thank you, Tripp.
I move that the Budget Committee of the City of Grants Pass approve the budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025, as amended in the amount of $255,198,659.
Excellent.
I second it.
A second from Vanessa, I think. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to, is there discussion?
I had a question. I had a question, because since we don't have to, obviously, we have to approve the tax rates, but we don't have to do anything about the utility fee? That just is a fee, so we don't?
No, that's,
Okay,
the council has already taken care of the
Adopted,
ordinance
okay.
changes for the utility fee.
Okay, thank you. I
And
just
then
want to make sure.
the revenue for the utility fee is represented in the budget tonight.
Okay, so the same way we did before. And would you go ahead and start again, Sandy?
Sandy Novak, yes. Oh, are we going to have a discussion first?
The time is now.
The time is now. Can we have a discussion first before we vote? Because we're going at, just 2 years ago, we were at 38% fund balance, and we're down to 30. It's really easy to spend. It's very hard to grow. You're going to have to not only live within your current year revenue, you're going to have to live in less than current year revenue. So that is just a caution. 30% is okay. 38 is good. So, but I do support this budget.
Josh, good.
And I'll
Vanessa?
just kind of be a bit of a counterbalance to that, in that I admire and respect the conservativeness of the CFO or the city finance director. But I do see some things inside of here that make me think that maybe it's being a little overly conservative, and that there may be a little more squish here. And I'm hopeful that at the end of 2024's fiscal year, I'll be proved right, because that means you guys got a lot more money. So there you go.
Okay, so let me see if there's any more discussion before I try to go through it again. Okay, Sandy has already voted aye. Josh?
Josh Ballack, aye.
Vanessa Ogier, yes.
Trip Android, yes.
Joel King, yes.
Adriana Reinhardt, yes.
Rick Riker, yes.
Tom Brandis, yes.
Valerie Lovelace, yes.
Kurt Collins, yes.
Are you there, Robert?
Bob Brosius, yes.
Good, thank you.
The next motion can be found on page 50, and it's in front of you.
Please read all of the decimals.
You got it. Mr. Chair, I move that the Budget Committee of the City of Grants Pass approve the property taxes for the fiscal year ending in June 30th, 2025 at a rate of 4.1335 per 1,000 of assessed value for the permanent tax levy, tax levy, and in the amount of $1.79 for the public safety operating levy.
Thank you. Could I get a second? Okay, second by Valerie. Okay, any discussion? Please. Okay, let's try with again. Sandy, start out.
Sandy Novak, yes.
Josh Ballack, yes.
Vanessa Ogier, yes.
Trip Android, yes.
Joel King, yes.
Adriana Reinhardt, yes.
Rick Riker, yes.
Tom Brandis, yes.
Valerie Lovelace, yes.
Kurt Collins, yes.
Robert, are you there?
I am, and yes.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to conclude by thanking the Budget Committee for your spirited discussion tonight and over the other 2 nights with regards to the budget and the departments that came in front of you. I also want to thank the X team and all of my colleagues for the preparation of the budget, and the public for their participation in this process. This budget continues the success that the City of Grants Pass has had in following the strategic plan and allocating resources to provide an opportunity for council, the community, and our colleagues, my colleagues, to continue to focus on developing community through public service. And with that, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are adjourned, and now we need to elect a budget officer for the Urban Renewal Agency.
Thank you.
Can we get a nomination?
I'd like to move that Tom Brandis be the budget officer.
Okay, we should vote on that. Maybe we can get a, all right. So, the budget message, oh, we need a chair and a vice chair, sorry, a vice chair. Don't you nominate a vice chair?
Chair, we also need a second and a vote.
I think Rick
I
seconded
seconded it. So who made it? Yeah.
So we just need a vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
thought you're good. In favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry. Now let's get a vice chair.
I nominate Josh Ballack.
Thank you. Nominated and second. Discussion. In favor?
Aye.
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 Good. Now, would you take off from there?
I will, and
Thank
as
you.
I'm speaking, let me tell you, it felt great to get out of my chair and come down here and present and be on my feet. So I would suggest, feel free to stand up and move around a little bit as I go through some of these presentation slides, if that would make you more comfortable. I know getting the blood flowing a little bit in different spots of your body might work really well. So as you move around and stretch your legs, I will go ahead and begin. You are now meeting as the Grants Pass Urban Renewal Agency, and tonight you will receive the budget message and the budget summary for the Urban Renewal Agency. Tonight we'll go through the budget message, the budget summary, the capital projects review, and approving the budget. The budget message for financial reporting purposes is the agency, which is a component of the city, and you are serving the same role as you did as the budget committee for the city. You're doing so now as an agency for the Urban Renewal Agency. So when it comes to Urban Renewal Agency, there really is three, it addresses all of the issues, but there's three that really highlights when it comes to the goals, and that's encouraging economic opportunities, facilitating sustainable manageable growth, and maintaining and operating our infrastructure to meet community needs. So we had an Urban Renewal Agency that was created back in 2016. It's on the screen behind me. It is highlighted in yellow. If you took that map and made it a zone map, you would see that probably most of the yellow is commercial zone and industrial business park zone, with a small amount of residential zones on the skirts of 6th and 7th Street and stuff. But primarily, it's employment land that has been focused on this. The overall picture of this represents 18% of our land mass. So the Urban Renewal Agency is 18% of the city's 11.84 acres we have, or 8 miles that we have. So fiscal year 25 is the 8th annual budget for the agency, and the budget accounts for receiving tax increment revenues. The revenues are applied to eligible projects based on the city's council's prioritization. They go through and they review the prioritization of the Urban Renewal Agency. We've had a number of workshops throughout the year that have addressed that. We're actually combining also some of those discussions with our ARPA dollar allocations, as they have some kind of nexus with some of the dollars associated with some of the similar projects. What is an Urban Renewal Agency? It's a program that has really been designed for improving specific areas of what we call blighted areas. That's defined in Oregon revised statutes. It is something that was authorized at the federal level and used throughout the state of Oregon, and other states do utilize some kind of tax increment finding engines also. For Oregon, it's defined in Oregon revised statutes 457. It generally covers, and the Urban Renewal Agency covers, as I mentioned, from a zoning perspective, employment land, commercial land, and then from there it focuses in on underdeveloped or underutilized properties that may be in poor condition, or buildings that may be in poor condition, or areas that have inadequacy of infrastructure, whether it be water, sewer, or transportation infrastructure, that's inhibiting the growth and the financial viability of a certain area within the Urban Renewal Agency. For this to work in areas designated within the Urban Renewal Agency, as we highlighted earlier in one of the slides, the assessed values of the properties within the area are frozen for the taxing districts, and I'll show you a graphic that defines this a little more. The taxes from that frozen base all go to the taxing jurisdiction, so it's not like their taxes go away. They still get a tax base, but it's based on when the Urban Renewal Agency was formed. Any growth in the tax rate goes to the Urban Renewal Agency. So how does that work? It sort of works like this here. So Beginning back in 2016, we created the Urban Renewal Agency. We are currently here right now. And as you'll see in the budget numbers, this blue, which is the tax increment financing, you'll notice that each year it keeps growing. That means the taxable assessed value is growing, what we're receiving is growing and going into the Urban Renewal Agency. Where from a standpoint of the taxing districts, they're still receiving the taxes they received from 2016 on an annual basis, but they're not receiving the growth. The growth is focused on going to the Urban Renewal Agency to deal with blighted areas and programs associated with the adoption of the plan, which was adopted by City Council. The idea and the concept is if you take a certain amount of resources and you focus on blighted areas and you do improvements to projects, if you provide an opportunity to take public dollars to incentivize private investment, you will at the end of the day have an area that has more value, taxable value, than if you didn't do the project. And so that's the theory of an urban renewal agency. And so by the time the urban renewal agency is over, you get into the post-urban renewal agency tax revenue, which is very high, and now all the taxing districts benefit from the improvements that these dollars created. Versus if you didn't have it, maybe it would be much lower because there wasn't an effort to deal with blighted areas as defined by blight. So the taxing districts that are impacted by our urban renewal agency are shown behind us, and the permanent property tax rates are there also. So say for instance for the library district or Josephine County or those taxing districts, that taxing agencies, they do have an impact. It does have an impact. They're receiving less on an annual basis because they're not receiving the growth. Now from a school perspective though, it doesn't impact say School District 7. School District 7 and the schools are, although included in this, the state of Oregon a number of years ago, it was over a decade ago, changed the taxing, the way they funded schools, and it was no longer based on what tax revenue each individual area got, but all the taxes go to the state then distributes for population, etc. So whether you have an urban renewal agency or not, it doesn't impact the money that, like say for instance, our schools are getting. This sort of highlights a graph that I showed you earlier where we take the dollars, the tax incremental financing, and we address blighted conditions with public investment. So that might be that we put in water and wastewater lines where there weren't any before. Say for instance, Spalding Industrial Park. And because of that, we spark, or maybe we partner with a big developer that wants to put something in there, and we partner with them to take public dollars to incentivize private investment, and then we get employment land that is providing employment and put on the tax rolls where it wasn't before. We're improving conditions. Maybe we're taking something that was a Brownsfield and we're cleaning it up and we're getting rid of all the liabilities that that piece of property has that's hindering development. And so we clean that up and we make it more marketable, which then spurs private investment, and that cycle of investment continues. There are examples throughout the nation of what tax increment financing can do. This is one at the downtown area in San Francisco. This here is, you may recall, this is Tom McCall Park up in Portland. There was basically an old highway that just ran through here, and it was a blighted area, and they took tax increment financing and created this park for the benefit of the community. So to give you just an idea of the area, again, we mentioned it's 18% of the total Grants Pass acreage. Grants Pass acreage is almost 7.5 thousand, and the Urban Renewal Agency represents 13,000, which is 18%. So you'll see here there's a connection when you look at the sewer plant and the water plant loan and the debt services associated with sewer plant. Why did we choose 18%? Because there's a needed nexus. We can't say that we're going to pay 50% of the water and wastewater debt when we're only utilizing 18% of the property. So it had to be linked. You get 18% debt allocation, you get 18% of the area. So then looking at the life of the Urban Renewal Agency, when it was formed back in 2016, we were looking at a total debt allocation of the Urban Renewal Agency of about $51 million. And at the time, we had a list of projects. That list of projects has changed a couple of times over the years. This represents the current list of projects and the approximate dollar amounts that go to those. These are long-range planning numbers and projects. Like I said, they've changed. Council, as serving as the Urban Renewal Agency Board, can change the projects and the dollar amounts and change these around a little bit. Say, for instance, the public swimming pool was not originally a project in the Urban Renewal Agency. It was not even in the Urban Renewal Agency. And so a couple of years ago, Council wanted the opportunity to use Urban Renewal Agency dollars to help potentially do something with the pool. So we did annex a portion of that. We did a little cherry stem to annex the pool. That is now part of the Urban Renewal Agency. There's only a small percentage that we can actually do that before we cannot continue to. We just can't continue to start annexing properties as Council sees fit. There is limitations to annexing and increasing the land of an Urban Renewal Agency. We are, the Urban Renewal Agency is planned for a 30-year life cycle. At the end of the 30 years, it sunsets and the taxes go back to the taxing agencies. So this is on page 3 of your Urban Renewal Agency handout. This is basically a breakdown of some of the budget. And as we go through these numbers that I show you, basically the end result is similar to what we talked about in the budget when you're talking about contingency. Remember, we had set aside $12 million in contingency that provides for max flexibility for council in the future. We're sort of doing the same recommendation with the Urban Renewal Agency, where ultimately special payments, which is really what's going into a big pot of dollars to where council has the most flexibility for the Urban Renewal Agency. This is a breakdown of the revenues coming in, and you can definitely see if you look at the net current revenues see how they're increasing. You take a look at the total Urban Renewal Agency assessed value, the frozen base, then you get the excess value. The excess value then provides a net current year revenue for the Urban Renewal Agency, and it's growing each year. That's because the excess values are growing each year, and that growth goes to the Urban Renewal Agency. So on page 2, these numbers sort of represent some information here. The Budget Committee's tentative approval will be for the allocation of $8.8 million for project contribution in the above categories. The table above is the current plan based on direction from the board that has met before and the projects that we have in the plan. Yes.
Was there an amendment to this? Because I'm seeing 8.577 or 8.674. I don't see an 8.4.
There was a purple copy handed out, I want to say on the second day.
Okay, I will find it.
There wasn't.
And if you
so
don't,
the answer
I
is
will
yes.
run and find a copy for you.
The answer is yes, there was an amendment, and Jason's giving you, we found it. Those numbers should match this.
I did say that. I just haven't had the finance director.
So it's estimated in fiscal year 25, $6.4 million with a projected 2.18 available for 26 in addition. The only hard commitment in fiscal year 25 is $438,000 in the water replacement treatment plant debt service, which you can see here. This is going to start paying on the debt over the life of the Urban Renewal Agency, that 18%. We've consolidated LB 6236 and SE 6200 for $255,000 previously sent to LB in fiscal year 2018. The remainder of the available tax increment resources are shown as special payments, which you'll see here under special payments. And that's recommended to be appropriate, but not yet to any specific project. When we first started the Urban Renewal Agency, we were actually taking dollars and appropriating to specific projects, but we found that that was a little bit of a hindrance, because ultimately, if a developer comes in and you have not allocated resources to that specific project, you have an issue. Say you've got all this stuff figured out and someone now wants to come in, buy Caveman Plaza and do some amazing thing, but we didn't allocate resources to Caveman Plaza, then you don't have the Urban Renewal Agency dollars to fund it, although it's a project in there and you'd have to do a budget adjustment. So we're trying to just put it all in one category, because we can't fully anticipate what the private side of the development side of things in the city of Grants Pass might do. There are many urban renewal projects competing for limited resources, and we have discussions from a policy perspective at a council level. There's a lot of projects that we'd like to get started. Say, for instance, the pool has allocated $5 million for the pool, and yet we've got other things that we'd like to allocate also, and we can't do them all at once, unless we started to bond things and then bond that against future tax increment financing that we're going to be receiving. But we have not gotten to that point from a policy decision yet. Examples of other projects that might fall into these categories we've talked about is downtown plaza, streetscape lighting, restrooms. We've talked about that. Housing development program is a new item that was added a couple of years ago to the Urban Renewal Agency, and that's going to help with affordable housing and projects within the area that maybe in the commercial zones and in some of the residential zones that won't affect the industrial zones and the business park zones, as residential is not allowed in that area. And then also the public swimming pools was an item that fell under the special category, that special payments category, which may be used within the next 2 years. Like many other urban renewal agencies, the Grants Pass Urban Renewal Agency should and will be an economic development tool. It will help remove blight within the community, create economic opportunities and jobs, bring state resources and money to Grants Pass as we try to coordinate and pool those resources with matching funds, accomplish council and community goals associated with economic development, and specifically with this plan, it will help pay a portion of the debt for the water treatment plant. That was one of the key spirits in forming the Urban Renewal Agency when the council first formed it in 2016, is they saw that as a potential funding tool to help keep rates down for water and sewer as we went through the big projects that we needed to fund, including the brand new water treatment plant and a phase 1 and phase 2 of the wastewater plant. Questions?
Tripp.
Sorry, on the revenue side, does the 4-H district, is that subject to the increment? And likewise, are we anticipating more revenues from the public safety district, or the sheriff's district out in the county that just got funded? Or?
Yeah, sorry. So I think the 4-H has ended, technically.
Well, I
right?
mean, didn't end. The county commissioners just didn't levy the tax for it last year, so
Yeah,
I'm kind of
okay.
curious, did that reduce our revenue?
No. And then the other side of the question was what again?
So as the sheriff's patrol district comes online.
So there is a quirky thing about the sheriff's district. No, it does not apply to the city limits. However, there is an overlapping issue potentially when somebody is annexed into the city from this point forward.
Other questions?
If they're in the urban renewal and they annex.
Get
into
closer
the
to your
city.
microphone,
If
Sandy.
they're in
There
the
you go.
urban renewal and they annex into the city. Yeah, which, is there a property or two? Possibly.
Other questions or comments?
So just looking at the revenue versus the project list, I mean, is my understanding correct that basically if we were to go bond, we'd have to pay for that bond entirely out of the revenue right now?
calculation works a little bit differently with TIF financing. So they look at your current revenue stream.
Yeah.
And then they back out the 25% that is required. There's a council memo that kind of goes into that, but it's more of what you currently are taking in today as far as your revenue, as how it's calculated of what you can leverage from those dollars. And then any new revenues on top of that, it could be a different bond obligation in the future.
So just doing the back of the envelope kind of math, we are anticipating, let's say, $2 million in property taxes. 75% of that is $1.5 million. That would be available for us immediately if we bonded to pay back the bond and every interest on the bond.
More or less.
Yeah, it's like how much of a bond could we float for that much of a payment?
I don't have it in front of me, but I think we've done a couple calculations where I could try.
I don't remember what that number is.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head either what $1.5 million gets at 5% over 30 years. I think we went with 20 years.
It'd be 20, yeah, because we're already 8 years in, 6 years into the plan.
Off the top of my head, I'm guessing it's like in the principal range of 800,000-ish.
The debt service on 800,000, oh, sorry. The principal portion is 800,000.
By
so
20 years, so 16-ish million.
16 million, yeah.
I'm guessing off the top of my head, just thinking what the numbers may be.
Right, so for the time being, we're still accumulating funds and waiting to fund projects advantageously and move funds as available into the sewer and water treatment plant.
Yeah, well, one of the things we're doing right now from a policy perspective is we're going to be coordinating with a consultant, and we're going to dive a little deeper into our list of projects and prioritize those and further define what might provide the biggest impact if we took the next 5 years, and what we should do with the resources that we're getting and how we can best spend them to give us the best return on our investment at the end of the cycle. So that's going to be an exciting project that we're doing, and I'm guessing this time next year we'll be done with that. We'll have recommendations, and the project list and the recommendations that you have may change a little bit, and maybe even the recommended allocation of budget dollars for the urban renewal agency may change, because we may have specific projects that we're wanting to actually start to initiate. Right now, it's been a little reactive, waiting for public to come in and do something, or we've been providing some small grants to help with blight and maybe some housing issues. But we're also trying to look at how we may be able to be proactive to bring in the best investments of private dollars.
More comments or questions? Josh?
So are you planning on doing this, when exactly are you planning on doing this review?
So we're starting the process. We're acquiring the contract with Elaine Howard from Elaine Howard Consulting, who was actually the original individual who helped us form the Urban Renewal Agency. We're going to bring her back online, and she's going to be working with staff in the community to develop this recommended plan for council.
And so you bring that forward in like November, December?
I don't know if this would be a Brad question. I haven't talked to Elaine on what that would look like on when we'll be working through that process and we'll have a completed project.
Yeah, we spoke to her just last week, and she's ready. We just need to coordinate council dates on figuring out a time. The council recently decided not to do a task force and to take it internal. So at this point, the council's we got to find some dates, and then Elaine will come down. So
okay,
it's pretty soon.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments?
Over here.
Valerie?
I just have a comment. Going back to the grant part of it, right now Dana Pierce, am I correct, is our person who does deal with the...
Yes.
So, and she is a person who could technically be going forward with grant opportunities for some of the leveraging of funds, is that correct?
We have some, but we're also I believe we put a hold on some also, and in order to get better prioritization of where the resources are going to be spent.
Yeah, correct. There's, I think, approximately $135,000 in FY24 that is unspent in that grant category for the URA, and then the budget that you have in front of you is another $250,000 for the grants. for FY '25.
Okay, so the 24 ones, because I think she just put out a RFP or whatever for people wanting the grant, so that's what I saw. It came out today on the newsletter so it must have been for the money that was 24 for them to apply for those grants. Okay,
Yep.
that makes sense. Thank
Yep.
you.
More discussion? Tripp?
Is the 30-year time limit statutory? Is that, or could the?
Up to 30. We can close it we could close it sooner.
But it has to close by year 30?
Yes.
And then kind of, since the water and sewer plants are such big parts of this, is that, just refresh, 18% of the total debt repayment for the entire life of that project, the water plant, or just the debt that the project repays during the life of the URA?
We've had a discussion on that, and I think I'm going to have JC respond, or actually Jason will be the one to respond to the actual, what is the original target of what that 18% represents?
Yeah, so they actually identified a number in the URA plan for both of those projects. And so we're using that number, which is I want to say it's in the $50 million range, and 18% of the debt service on that. And we're just amortizing that out over the remaining life of the URA, if that makes sense. Did I say that clear enough?
Like, yeah, totally. I mean,
Okay.
guess, like, would that be available to be revised, given the escalations in cost of the water treatment plant?
So I know that came before council for consideration, but because there are so many other pressing projects, and with the rates and the grants and the loans that we've identified, the treatment plant is likely funded, they elected to go a different direction.
Yeah, it just seems like there's a very delicate dance between, if I'm trying to make the maximum debt contribution, repayment contribution to those two facilities, that comes at the cost of other projects, and it also has to be timed very specific, considering the length of the bonds we're going to float for those and the length of the URA.
It was. I know council had a tough time with that, and I think that we maximized the amount, or I feel like we did, that maximize the amount that the URA could contribute to the water plant, and we're banking on those funds being there. So very important part of our funding package.
More discussion?
So I did find the memo that I wrote regarding the TIF financing. I did a little awkward because there were 24 years at the time. So 24 years at 4.5%. You're looking at about an $18.7 million project, which would cost the URA about $31 million in actual debt service payments.
Yeah, it just eats into the remainder of the increment you can redirect towards the water treatment plant.
So there are two motions. There is a motion for the Budget Committee in front of you here, and then there's another motion.
Aaron,
after
do I
that.
have to get public
You
comment?
have to get public comment.
Yes. Would anyone from the public like to comment on the agency? Okay. And does anyone have any more general questions for Aaron? Okay, Aaron, please.
Yes, in front of you is a sample motion to approve tax increment financing for the Urban Renewal Agency.
Can somebody make that motion?
I move the Budget Committee of the Grants Pass Urban Renewal Agency approve the property taxes for the 2024-2025 fiscal year tax increment for the maximum amount of revenue that may be raised by dividing the taxes for the Grants Pass Urban Renewal Plan area under Section 1C, Article 9 of the Oregon Constitution and ORS Chapter 457.
Excellent, thank you. Vanessa seconded. Any more discussion about it? Those in favor, we'll do it individually like we did before. Please.
Sandy Novak, yes.
Josh Ballack, aye.
Vanessa Ogier, yes.
Trip Androy, yes.
Joel King, yes.
Adriana Reinhardt, yes.
Rick Reichert, yes.
Tom Brandis, yes.
Valerie Lovelace, yes.
Kurt Collins, yes.
Bob Brosius, yes.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, I think we've completed the business.
The next item is a sample
Oh.
motion. We need actually two motions for the Urban Renewal Agency, and the next one is a motion
Oh,
to actually approve the
okay.
budget.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair? I move that the Budget Committee of the Grants Pass Urban Renewal Agency approve the budget for fiscal year ending in June 30th, 2025 in the amount of $8,929,296.
Excellent. Rick, with a second. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, in favor?
Sandy Novak, yes.
Josh Pollack, yes.
Vanessa Ogier, yes.
Trip Android, yes.
Joel King, yes.
Adriana Reinhardt, yes.
Rick Riker, yes.
Tom Brandis, yes.
Valerie Lovelace, yes.
Kurt Collins, yes.
Bob Brocius, yes.
Thank you, Bob. I think we have completed our work for the evening, for the budget session. Thank you all for being here. More fun next year.
Enjoyed sharing stories with you.